She was invited by her millionaire ex just to be humiliated at the wedding, but what happened next shocked everyone. The sound system crackled to life, cutting through the string quartet's delicate melody. 300 of Manhattan's elite sat frozen in their seats as a woman's voice echoed across the clifftop wedding venue. "I do." Dominic Castellano's head snapped around, his eyes scanning the rows of guests until they locked onto her. Lucia Romano sat calmly in the 7th row, her royal blue dress a stark contrast to the sea of pastel gowns around her. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched him with the kind of quiet power that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. The voice, her voice, continued from the speakers, not because of love lost, Dominic, but because of truths untold. His bride, Genevieve Ashford Kent, turned from the altar, her veil trembling as she looked at him with dawning confusion. "What is this? What's happening?" On the massive screens flanking the altar, screens meant to display their wedding vows to guests in the back rows, a different image appeared. A title card in stark white letters. "The price of polish. How tech millionaires erase their roots and their ethics." Dominic's face drained of color. His mother, Eleanor, half rose from her seat, her hand clutching her pearl necklace. And Lucia just smiled. Because 3 weeks ago, when that cream-colored envelope had arrived at her gallery, she'd made a choice. Not to get even, not to get revenge, but to tell the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the most devastating weapon of all. Have you ever been invited somewhere just to be humiliated? Have you ever had someone from your past try to prove you weren't good enough? That you didn't belong? That you never deserved them in the first place? Stay with me. Because what happened at this wedding didn't just stop a ceremony, it brought down an empire, exposed a fraud, and taught everyone watching a lesson about the difference between being polished and being real. But let me take you back to where it all started. 3 weeks before this millionaire's world came crashing down. The gallery lights hummed softly in the converted warehouse space in Brooklyn. Lucia Romano stood before her latest piece, a sprawling mixed-media installation she'd titled Unbroken. Her hands, permanently stained with paint despite her best efforts at scrubbing, made final adjustments to the lighting. The piece was a riot of color and texture. Salvaged metal from Queens junkyards, bold crimson, and gold resins that caught the light. Fragments of mirrors reflecting the viewer back at themselves. It was raw, unapologetic, completely defiantly hers. At 32, Lucia had finally found her voice as an artist. Not the voice that people wanted her to have. Not the voice that fit comfortably in upscale galleries or matched expensive furniture, but her voice. The one that spoke about struggle and transformation, about refusing to sand down your edges to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you. It was Thursday evening. The gallery where she'd been given her first solo exhibition was preparing to close for the night. Lucia should have been heading back to her studio apartment in Bushwick, maybe grabbing Thai food on the way, falling into bed exhausted like she did most nights. But something kept her there. Call it intuition. Call it fate. Call it the universe's sixth sense of humor. Miriam Goldstein, the gallery owner who'd taken a chance on Lucia when no one else would, emerged from the back office. Her weathered face, framed by silver hair she wore in a neat bun, carried an expression Lucia couldn't quite read. Concern maybe. Or curiosity. In her hands, she held a cream-colored envelope that seemed to glow against her dark blazer. "This came by courier." Miriam's voice was careful, measured. She'd known Lucia long enough to sense when something wasn't right. Hand delivered. The messenger said it was urgent. Waited for a signature and everything. Lucia wiped her hands on her paint-splattered jeans and took the envelope. The paper was expensive. The kind of expensive that regular people never touch, that exists in a world of private clubs and trust funds and names that open doors. She recognized the embossed logo immediately. A sleek, minimalist design. 2 interlocking C's. Castellano Enterprises. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't seen that logo in 3 years. Not since the night her world had imploded in a penthouse suite overlooking the Hudson River. Not since the night Dominic Castellano had looked at her with something that might have been pity and told her she just didn't fit into his life anymore. "You okay, sweetheart?" Miriam moved closer, her hand hovering near Lucia's shoulder. Lucia nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid her thumb under the envelope's flap. The paper tore with a whisper. Inside, she found 2 items. A formal wedding invitation, printed on cardstock so thick it felt like fabric, and a handwritten note on personal stationery. The invitation read like 1,000 others. Mr. and Mrs. Theodore Castellano request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Dominic Theodore Castellano, to Miss Genevieve Elizabeth Ashford Kent, Saturday the 15th of June at 4 in the afternoon. The Ashford Kent estate, Southampton. But it was the handwritten note that made her blood run cold. She recognized Dominic's precise handwriting immediately. He'd always been meticulous about things like that. Proper penmanship. Proper everything. Dearest Lucia, time has a way of putting things in perspective. These past 3 years have shown me what truly matters in life. I'm getting married to Genevieve next month at her family's estate in the Hamptons. Your presence would mean the world to me. A celebration of how far we've both come. It would prove that we've grown beyond our past. Lucia's eyes caught on the next paragraph, and her jaw tightened. Genevieve has heard so much about you and your charming little art projects. She's fascinated by people who pursue passion over profit. Do come. It would make the celebration complete. It was signed simply, fondly, Dominic. Lucia read the note once, twice, 3 times. Her lawyer's eye, the analytical part of her brain that had gotten her through 4 years of waitressing while pursuing her art, caught every calculated word choice. Charming little art projects. The quotation marks weren't visible, but she could hear them in the phrasing. Pursue passion over profit. As if what she did was a hobby. A cute diversion. Something people did when they couldn't hack it in the real world. And that phrase, how far we've both come. As if their trajectories had been parallel. As if they'd both grown and evolved, when the truth was he'd stayed exactly the same and she'd had to completely rebuild herself from the ashes of what he'd made her believe she should be. Miriam peered at the invitation, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the names. Ashford Kent? As in the Ashford Kent Museum? The Ashford Kent wing at Columbia Presbyterian? Lucia nodded slowly, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. The very same. Old money. The kind that doesn't talk about money, because it's been there so long it's just air. Just expected. Bad news? Miriam's voice was gentle, concerned. Lucia looked up from the note, and to her surprise, she felt tears threatening. Not tears of sadness. Tears of rage. Pure crystallizing rage that was rapidly transforming into something else. Something sharper. More focused. More dangerous. No. Lucia's voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. Actually, I think it might be the best news I've had in weeks. Miriam's eyebrows shot up. Come again? Lucia carefully folded the note and slid it back into the envelope. Her mind was already working, already planning, already seeing the pieces fall into place. She walked over to her installation, studying it with fresh eyes. Unbroken. She'd created it as a testament to her own journey. Shattered pieces reformed into something new, something stronger. She'd had no idea how literal that metaphor was about to become. He invited me to humiliate me. Lucia spoke quietly, her fingers trailing along the edge of a mirror fragment embedded in the sculpture. To parade me in front of his new life, his new bride, his new world. To show me and probably to show her that he upgraded, that he moved on to someone more appropriate. Someone who fits. That's despicable. Miriam's voice held genuine anger. It is. But it's also a gift. Because he has no idea who I am now. He thinks I'm still that girl who needed his approval, who changed herself to fit into his world. He thinks I'm still small enough to be hurt by his success. And you're not? Lucia turned to face Miriam, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. Oh, I'm not small at all anymore. And I'm about to show him exactly how much I've grown. But to understand why this invitation was meant to destroy Lucia Romano, why Dominic Castellano thought he could use his wedding as a weapon against her, you need to know who she was 3 years ago. You need to understand the girl she used to be. The girl who fell in love with a boy from the Bronx who'd made it big, and thought that love could bridge the gap between their worlds. 3 years earlier, Lucia had been a completely different person. Still passionate about her art, still determined, still talented, but uncertain. Seeking validation from sources outside herself. Believing that success meant acceptance from the right people, the right galleries, the right world. She'd been working at Aurelio, an upscale Italian restaurant in Tribeca where the house wine cost $50 a glass and the clientele discussed mergers over hand-rolled pasta. She worked double shifts most weeks, lunch and dinner services that left her feet aching and her smile muscles sore. From maintaining the pleasant, unobtrusive demeanor that earned the best tips, her family, a tight-knit clan of working-class Italians from Astoria, loved her fiercely but didn't understand her dreams. Her father, Vincent Romano, had worked for the sanitation department for 30 years before retiring. He'd wanted Lucia to become a teacher. Steady job, good benefits, pension, something safe. Her mother, Angela, ran a small hair salon out of their basement. She'd built a loyal clientele over decades, and she was proud of her work. But she kept asking Lucia when she'd get a real job, when she'd stop playing with paints and start building a future, when she'd meet a nice boy, settle down, give them grandchildren. Art, to them, was something you did on Sundays. A hobby, not a career. Their parents, Lucia's grandparents, had come from Sicily with nothing. They'd worked themselves to the bone so their children could have better lives. And their children had worked hard so Lucia's generation could have opportunities. But those opportunities, in their minds, meant stability, security, not the precarious, poverty-adjacent life of an artist. Lucia loved them, but she felt utterly alone in her dreams. She'd been working at Aurelio for 2 years, saving every penny she could while spending her free hours in a converted warehouse studio in Bushwick that she shared with 3 other struggling artists. Her corner of the space was barely 100 square feet, but it was hers. And the art she made there, art that no one except her roommates ever saw, was the most honest thing in her life. October came to New York the way it always does. A sudden cool snap after an extended summer, leaves turning overnight, the city exhaling after the humidity finally broke. It was a Wednesday evening. Lucia was exhausted from a lunch shift that had run long and a subway delay that had made her late for dinner service. She was in the weeds, as restaurant workers say. 3 tables sat at once, drink orders backing up, the kitchen running behind. And then he walked in. Dominic Castellano shook rain from his coat as the host guided him to a table in Lucia's section. He was alone, which was unusual for Aurelio. Most of their guests came in groups, business dinners, dates, celebrations. Solo diners were rare. Lucia grabbed a menu and a wine list, pasted on her professional smile, and approached. "Good evening. Welcome to Aurelio. Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up, and she felt the impact of his attention like a physical thing. He had dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, the kind of presence that came from absolute confidence, but when he smiled, it was warm, genuine, lacking the predatory edge she'd learned to recognize in wealthy men who saw waitresses as part of the ambiance. "A glass of the Barolo, please. And can I order in Italian? I don't get to practice enough these days." Lucia felt her professional mask slip slightly into a real smile. "Of course. I'd be happy to take your order in Italian." They switched languages, and his accent was good. Not perfect, but good. Northern Italian, she thought. When he stumbled slightly over a menu item, she gently corrected his pronunciation, and instead of being offended, he laughed. "You're good. Where are you from? Your accent is pure." "Queens? Astoria?" Lucia felt a small spark of surprise. Most of Aurelio's clientele couldn't tell one New York borough from another, let alone place regional Italian accents. "Good ear. Born and raised in Astoria. You?" "Started in the Bronx. Arthur Avenue. Ended up in Manhattan." He extended his hand across the table, a gesture that blurred the line between server and customer in a way that should have felt inappropriate but somehow didn't. "I'm Dominic." "Lucia." She shook his hand briefly, aware of the host watching her, aware that she was breaking protocol. "And before you ask, yes, the irony of an Italian girl working at an Italian restaurant is not lost on me." His laugh was rich and unguarded, the kind of laugh that made other diners glance over with curiosity. "I wasn't going to ask, but I appreciate you heading off the obvious joke." Lucia took his order, brought his wine, attended to her other tables. But she kept finding her attention drawn back to him. He wasn't on his phone like most solo diners. He was reading an actual book, eating slowly, savoring the food rather than consuming it as fuel. When the dinner rush finally eased and the restaurant began to empty, Dominic was still there. He'd moved on to coffee. Strong espresso, no sugar. He caught her eye as she wiped down a nearby table. "Is your shift almost over?" Lucia glanced at the clock. 11:15. "About 15 minutes. He nodded, seeming to consider something. I know this is forward, but would you like to sit for a minute? Have a coffee? I've been eating alone, and I'd appreciate the company." Every instinct told Lucia this was a terrible idea. She didn't know this man. He could be anyone, want anything. But there was something in his eyes, something genuine. And she was tired of playing it safe. Tired of saying no to possibilities. "One coffee. Then I need to go." He smiled, like she'd given him a gift. Over coffee that stretched into an hour, Dominic Castellano told Lucia Romano his story. How he'd grown up on Arthur Avenue, the son of a contractor and a nurse. How he'd taught himself to code in high school, building websites for local businesses for $50 a pop. How he'd worked his way through City College, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on coffee and ambition. He'd built his first tech startup in his mother's basement. A data security platform for small businesses. Something affordable, accessible, designed to protect the mom and pop shops. And local companies that couldn't afford enterprise-level solutions. He'd sold it when he was 28 for $30 million. "I could have retired." Dominic's hands wrapped around his espresso cup, his eyes distant with memory. "My mother wanted me to. Said I'd earned the right to relax. But I couldn't. Because I kept seeing the same problem over and over. The rich getting richer. The powerful getting more powerful. Small businesses being crushed by corporations. I wanted to build something bigger." Castellano Enterprises. "We're revolutionizing data security, making protection accessible instead of just another luxury." Lucia found herself leaning forward, drawn in despite her usual wariness. "So you're using success to give back, not give back. Give forward. There's a difference." His eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. "Giving back implies charity. Implies that you made it out, and now you're tossing scraps back over the wall. Giving forward means you're tearing down the wall. Changing the system. Making sure the next person doesn't have to climb as hard as you did." Lucia felt something shift in her chest. She liked this. Liked him. The idea of success that remembered where it came from. "What about you?" Dominic leaned back in his chair. "What's your story, Lucia from Astoria?" She deflected at first. Embarrassed by her waitressing uniform and paint-stained fingernails. Embarrassed by the gap between her dreams and her reality. But he pressed gently, and eventually, the words spilled out. About her art. About the studio space she shared in Bushwick. About her family who loved her but didn't understand. About wanting to say something with her work, to create art that mattered, that spoke truth about class and struggle, and the beauty of refusing to be diminished. "Show me." Dominic's voice was quiet but certain. "What?" "Show me your art. I want to see it." Lucia laughed, shaking her head. "It's almost midnight. The studio is in Bushwick. This is crazy." "So? I'm not tired. Are you tired?" She should have said yes. Should have gone home, filed this away as a nice moment, protected herself from the vulnerability of letting a stranger see her soul. But Lucia Romano had never been good at should. "No, I'm not tired." They took an Uber to Bushwick. The warehouse was quiet at this hour, her studio mates long gone. Lucia unlocked the heavy metal door, and led Dominic through the cavernous space to her corner. She flipped on the lights, and her work came into view. Canvases leaned against brick walls. A large work table covered in sketches and paint tubes. Sculptures in various stages of completion. And dominating the space, a massive canvas she'd titled, Hunger. It was visceral. Raw. An abstract exploration of desire and deprivation, rendered in deep reds and blacks with flashes of gold that suggested both wealth and the precious nature of sustenance. Dominic walked among her pieces in reverent silence. Lucia's heart hammered in her chest. This was more intimate than anything physical. This was letting someone see the inside of her mind, the contents of her heart. He stopped in front of Hunger for a long time. So long that Lucia started to feel anxious, started to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Finally, he turned to face her. "You're extraordinary." The way he said it, the way he looked at her. Not at her body. Not with the assessing gaze of a man sizing up a woman. But at her. All of her. Like she was already everything she dreamed of becoming. Like her art wasn't a hobby or a phase but a calling. A truth. Something broke open in Lucia's chest. A door she'd kept locked. A possibility she'd been afraid to hope for. He crossed the space between them and kissed her. And Lucia kissed him back. And in that moment, In that warehouse studio surrounded by her art, she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who could see her. If you've ever fallen in love with someone who made you feel seen, who made you feel possible, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to show you why sometimes the people who see us best are also the ones who hurt us worst. Their love story unfolded like a fever dream. Dominic swept into Lucia's life with the force of a summer storm. All passion and grand gestures and a world she'd never imagined having access to. He called the next day, and the day after that. Within a week, they were inseparable. He took her to private gallery openings in Chelsea, where the art sold for more than her annual salary. Rooftop parties in penthouses, where the terraces overlooked Central Park and the drinks were poured by professional mixologists. Weekend getaways to exclusive resorts in the Catskills where the staff somehow knew his preferences before he voiced them. Dominic was her biggest champion, or so it seemed. He funded a small showing of her work at a Soho gallery, inviting his wealthy friends and business associates. He gave her a studio in his building, a light-filled space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. No more sharing a corner of a warehouse. This was hers. All hers. You should be painting full-time, Dominic said it one morning as they had coffee in his penthouse. Quit, Aurelio. Focus on your art. Let me support you while you build your career. Lucia hesitated. Her independence had always been important to her, but the thought of painting full-time, of not going home with aching feet and forced smiles, was intoxicating. I don't want to be dependent on you. You're not dependent. You're being smart, investing in your talent. Think of it as a grant, a fellowship. I believe in what you're creating. So she quit her job, moved into the studio he provided, began painting with an intensity she'd never had time for before. And for a while, it was perfect. She was creating her best work. Dominic told her he loved her complexity, her passion, her refusal to compromise her artistic vision for commercial appeal. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, things began to shift. It started with gentle suggestions. Lucia had created a series exploring police brutality and systemic racism. Bold, confrontational pieces that used stark imagery and uncomfortable color palettes. She was excited about them. Proud. Ready to show them at her next exhibition. Dominic looked at them with a frown. They're powerful. Really powerful. But maybe a bit heavy for this audience? What audience? The people who buy art, who support galleries. You want to build a career, right? Maybe consider something more, accessible, more decorative? Lucia felt the words like a slap. Decorative? My art isn't meant to match furniture, Dominic. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you need to think strategically. You can make your statement pieces, but you also need to make work that sells. That's just reality. Lucia painted over those pieces. She told herself it was a strategic choice, that she could always return to difficult subjects later, that building a career meant compromise. Then came the comments about her appearance. They started casually. Compliments that carried barbs. You'd look stunning in this, designer I know. Let me connect you. Designer clothes appeared in her studio. Dresses that cost more than her old monthly rent. Beautiful, elegant things. But not her style. Too refined. Too polished. Genevieve's stylist is a miracle worker. Maybe we could get you an appointment? Just to try something new with your hair? Genevieve. The name entered their conversation so casually Lucia almost missed its significance. A colleague. A business associate. Someone from his old world who helped run charitable foundations. Someone who understood the social dynamics of their circle. Lucia started changing. Small things at first. She wore the designer clothes to events. Got her hair styled the way Dominic suggested. Toned down her opinions at dinner parties. Smiled politely when his friends made comments that made her uncomfortable. She told herself this was growth. Maturity. Learning to navigate a new world. But late at night, alone in the beautiful studio, she'd look at her paintings and barely recognize the person who'd made them. The breaking point came at the Museum of Modern Art Gala. Dominic's company was a major sponsor. Castellano Enterprises had donated $500,000. It was a big night. Important people. Important connections. Lucia wore one of the designer dresses. Had her hair styled at the salon he'd suggested. Played the part of the successful entrepreneur's girlfriend with practiced grace. She smiled at the right times. Laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Made small talk about nothing. But then she saw the installation. A controversial piece by a young Guatemalan artist that critiqued capitalism and American imperialism through visceral imagery. It was exactly the kind of work she used to dream of creating. Bold. Uncompromising. True. A group of conservative donors stood nearby, making dismissive comments. Calling it juvenile. Saying the museum should focus on real art instead of political statements. Lucia felt something snap inside her. "Excuse me, but this is real art." Her voice was polite but firm. "The artist is making a crucial point about the human cost of our economic systems. About the lives destroyed by the policies we benefit from. Art is supposed to make us uncomfortable. That's the point." The donors looked at her with surprise and thinly veiled disdain. One older woman in diamonds that could fund a small country raised an eyebrow. "How refreshing." Passion. "Though I'm not sure an art lecture is what we need at a fundraising gala, dear." "I'm not lecturing. I'm discussing art. At an art museum. Isn't that what we're here for?" The group exchanged glances and drifted away. And Dominic, who'd been across the room, materialized at her elbow. His hand closed around her arm. Firm. Not quite painful but close. "We need to talk." He pulled her into a quiet corridor away from the event. "Do you have to be so intense about everything?" His voice was low but sharp. "I was discussing art. You were lecturing major donors about their moral failings. These people write checks. Big checks. You can't just say whatever you think." "Why not? I thought you valued authenticity. Giving forward, remember? Changing the system? There's a time and place, Lucia. You don't understand how this world works. There are ways to advocate for change without alienating everyone who has the power to make that change happen. So I should smile and nod while they dismiss art that matters? While they congratulate themselves for writing checks, and ignore what the actual work is saying?" Dominic ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "You're being naive. This isn't your warehouse in Bushwick. This is the real world. The world where things get done. Where money flows. Where power lives. If you want to be part of it, you need to learn the rules. And if I don't want to follow rules that require me to be silent?" The silence that stretched between them was deafening. In his eyes, Lucia saw something that made her blood run cold. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed by her. By her passion. Her authenticity. Her refusal to sand down her edges. Then maybe? He stopped himself, but the words hung unfinished between them. "Maybe what, Dominic?" "Nothing. Let's just get through tonight." They did get through that night. And the next day. And the week after. But something fundamental had broken. Lucia felt it in the way he looked at her. The way he introduced her to people. His girlfriend. The artist. Said with a slight emphasis that suggested hobby rather than profession. 2 weeks after the gala, Lucia decided to surprise him. She'd been working on a new series. Sketches exploring class inequality in New York. The invisible people who kept the city running. Delivery workers. Cleaners. Construction crews. She was excited about it. It felt like finding her voice again. She let herself into Dominic's penthouse using the key he'd given her. Called out his name, no answer. She heard voices from his study and headed that way, planning to show him the sketches. She stopped in the doorway. Dominic sat at his desk. And across from him, in a chair that Lucia had sat in 100 times, was a woman. Blonde. Impeccably dressed in a way that looked effortless, but Lucia knew cost thousands. Designer everything. Hair that moved in perfect waves. Makeup so subtle it appeared natural. Genevieve Ashford Kent. They were going over foundation budgets. Completely innocent. Professional. But the way they looked at each other. The easy intimacy of their interaction. The way Genevieve laughed at something Dominic said and touched his hand briefly. The way he leaned toward her like a plant toward sunlight. Lucia knew. She just knew. Lucia. Dominic stood quickly, surprise flashing across his face. "I didn't know you were coming over. I wanted to surprise you. Show you some new work." She held up the sketchbook, feeling suddenly foolish. Genevieve turned, and her smile was kind. Genuinely kind. Which somehow made it worse. "You must be Lucia. Dominic has told me so much about you. Your art sounds fascinating." Genevieve. Lucia managed to keep her voice steady. "The art historian. Guilty." Genevieve stood, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. I actually studied some emerging artists from unconventional backgrounds for my thesis. I'd love to see your work sometime. Maybe. Lucia extracted her hand. Dominic, can we talk? Genevieve took the hint with practiced grace. I should go anyway. Yes, we can finish this tomorrow, Dom. Dom. The nickname felt intimate. Proprietary. After Genevieve left, Dominic turned to Lucia with a forced smile. Sorry about that. Foundation work never ends. What did you want to show me? Lucia set down her sketchbook. We need to talk. And there it was. 4 words that ended everything. Dominic's smile faded. He gestured to the chair Genevieve had vacated. Sit. But Lucia couldn't sit. Couldn't stay still. She paced to study. This room she'd been in so many times, now seeing it differently. The expensive art on the walls. The view of the Hudson. The careful curation of every element to project success and sophistication. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. It's not that simple. It really is. You're in love with Genevieve. Have been for a while probably. And I've been, what? A project? An experiment in dating outside your usual type? That's not fair. Isn't it? Be honest, Dominic. When you look at me now, do you see your equal? Or do you see someone you need to fix? Someone who embarrasses you in front of your real peers? His silence was answer enough. Lucia. His voice was gentle, which made it worse. You're incredibly talented. Passionate. Special. But we're on different paths. We want different things. We wanted the same things. We talked about it. Changing systems. Using success to give forward. Or was that just talk? Just the story you told yourself to feel better about joining the club you claimed to want to dismantle? I have changed things. Castellano Enterprises has created jobs. Protected small businesses. By becoming exactly like the corporations you said you were different from. I've heard the rumors, Dominic. About how you push out competitors. How you acquire smaller companies and gut them. How you say one thing in public and do another in boardrooms. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I've been in those boardrooms. I've heard you talk to your investors. I've watched you become someone else entirely. I've grown up. Maybe you should try it. The words hung between them like a slap. Lucia felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. You're right. We're on different paths. Because I still remember where I came from. And you've spent 3 years trying to forget. Dominic stood, moving toward her. That's not true. But I need someone who understands this world. Who can navigate it? Who can be a partner in this life? Not someone I have to constantly worry about offending the wrong person. Someone like Genevieve. He didn't deny it. I think you should go. Lucia looked at him. Really looked. And realized she'd been in love with a ghost. With who she thought he was. Who he claimed to be. The boy from the Bronx who'd made it big and stayed true. But that boy, if he ever existed, was long gone. In his place stood Dominic Castellano. Tech millionaire. Future husband to old money. Someone who'd traded his soul for a seat at a table Lucia didn't even want to sit at anymore. I'll pack my things from the studio. Lucia. Keep it. Use it as long as you need. I'm not a monster. No, you're just a coward. Which is somehow worse. She walked out of his penthouse that night, and didn't look back. Took the elevator down 40 floors feeling like she was falling. Walked out into the Manhattan night and just kept walking. Across the bridge back to Brooklyn. Back to herself. She moved into a tiny apartment in Bushwick the next week. Refused his offers of financial help. Refused the studio. Refused everything connected to him. She cried for weeks. Massive, ugly crying that left her dehydrated and puffy-eyed. Her roommate, Raphael, a sculptor she'd known from art school, let her crash on his couch and fed her takeout and didn't ask questions. But then one morning, Lucia woke up and didn't cry. She got up, made coffee, and started painting with a fury she'd never known before. Over the next 3 years, Lucia Romano transformed, not into what someone else wanted, into herself. Fully. Completely. Unapologetically. She worked 3 jobs at first. Waitressing. Gallery assistant. Teaching art classes to kids in community centers. It was exhausting. Brutal. But it was hers. Every dollar she earned. Every choice she made. Hers. Her art changed too. Became rawer. More honest. More powerful. The political pieces she'd abandoned came roaring back. But deeper now. More nuanced. She painted about class and capitalism and the cost of ambition, about women who rebuilt themselves from rubble, about refusing to be diminished. Year 1 was about survival, about learning to be alone, about painting through pain. Year 2 brought unexpected recognition. A small gallery in Brooklyn gave her a show. The pieces sold. Not for millions, but enough. Critics started paying attention. Her voice, they said, was fresh, uncompromising, necessary. She met Miriam Goldstein, who became her mentor and champion. Met Isabel Chen, a documentary filmmaker who wanted to collaborate on projects exploring art and authenticity. Met Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist who appreciated her unflinching honesty. She built community, real community, not networking, not strategic relationships, but genuine connections with people who valued truth over polish. Year 3 brought her first solo exhibition at Miriam's gallery. Real critical acclaim. Museums started calling. She wasn't rich, probably would never be, but she was herself, and her work mattered. She'd learned that the only approval she needed was her own. That authenticity was more valuable than access. That the people who couldn't handle her at her most passionate didn't deserve her at her most vulnerable. And then, 3 weeks before her biggest exhibition yet, 3 years after Dominic Castellano had looked at her like she was an embarrassment he needed to outgrow, the invitation arrived. Back in the gallery, Lucia stood holding that cream-colored envelope. Miriam watched her with concern. "What are you going to do?" Lucia pulled out her phone. Texted her best friend Raphael a photo of the invitation. His response came immediately. "That pompous ass wants you to watch him marry American royalty? Tell me you're not going." Lucia smiled. Typed back, "Oh, I'm definitely going, but not the way he expects." She looked at her installation. Unbroken. At the art covering the gallery walls. At the woman she'd become. Dominic Castellano thought he could invite her to his wedding and prove she'd never been good enough, never been right for his world. He wanted to humiliate her, to show her what she'd lost. He had no idea he was about to learn what he'd lost. And what happens when you underestimate someone who's spent 3 years learning their own worth? "Miriam, can you do me a favor?" The older woman nodded. "Anything, sweetheart. I need the contact information for every art publication you know. And I need to make some phone calls." Lucia spent the next 3 days making calls. Strategic calls. The kind that would change everything. She worked from her studio apartment, surrounded by sketches and coffee cups, her mind sharp with purpose. First call was to Isabel Chen. They'd met at an art and activism panel 2 years ago, and had been talking about collaborating ever since. Isabel made documentaries that dismantled comfortable narratives. Her last film had exposed corruption in the fashion industry. Before that, labor exploitation in tech manufacturing. She was fearless, uncompromising, exactly who Lucia needed. The phone rang twice before Isabel picked up. "Lucia Romano. To what do I owe the pleasure? I have a story for you. About tech millionaires who erase their roots. About the price of polish. About authenticity versus ambition." There was a pause. Lucia could almost hear Isabel's mind working. "I'm listening." Lucia told her everything. About Dominic. About their relationship. About how he'd molded her into something more acceptable before discarding her for someone who came pre-polished. About the invitation designed to humiliate. And about what she knew of his business practices. The things she'd overheard during late-night phone calls. The deals discussed over dinner. The casual mentions of acquisitions and competitor elimination that she hadn't fully understood at the time. When Lucia finished, Isabel let out a low whistle. "That's not just a story. That's a reckoning. But we'd need evidence. Documentation. More than just your testimony." "I know. Which is why I'm also calling Marcus Webb. He's been investigating Castellano Enterprises for months. I can connect you two. And I can share what I know. Names. Dates. Conversations I remember." "When were you thinking of releasing this?" "June 15th. The day of his wedding. Noon exactly. Right as he's about to say I do." The silence on the other end stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Isabel laughed. It was the sound of someone recognizing poetic justice when they heard it. "You're diabolical. I'm in. Let's burn this empire down." Second call was to Marcus Webb. investigative journalist for the Manhattan Chronicle. He'd been sniffing around Castellano Enterprises for 8 months, following rumors of unethical business practices, aggressive acquisitions, promised partnerships that turned into hostile takeovers, small businesses that trusted Dominic's pitch about protecting them, only to be absorbed and dismantled. Marcus had reached out to Lucia 6 months ago, knowing about her connection to Dominic. She'd declined to comment then. Not ready, not healed enough. But now she was ready. Marcus answered on the first ring. He always did. Journalists never missed calls. Lucia Romano. I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you. I'm ready to talk. And I have someone you need to meet. Isabel Chen. Documentary filmmaker. We want to work together on this. She heard the excitement in his voice, carefully controlled. What changed your mind? He invited me to his wedding. To watch him marry Genevieve Ashford Kent. To prove I never belonged in his world. Marcus let out a sharp breath. That's bold. Cruel, but bold. It's a mistake. Because he thinks I'm still the woman who needed his approval. He has no idea who I've become. And he definitely doesn't know what I'm about to do. Which is, tell the truth. All of it. Every conversation I remember. Every deal I overheard. Every moment I watched him become the thing he claimed to oppose. I'll give you everything. But I need this story to run on June 15th, noon. Alongside Isabel's documentary. You want maximum impact. I want the truth to speak for itself. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know this will get ugly. His lawyers will come after you. They'll try to discredit you. Paint you as a bitter ex. Let them try. I'm not some scorned woman seeking revenge. I'm an artist who watched a man sell his soul and call it growth. And I have receipts. Then let's get to work. Third call was to Carmen Rodriguez, fashion designer, rising star in the sustainable fashion world. They'd met at a gallery opening a year ago and bonded over their shared belief that art should mean something. Carmen had shown Lucia her latest collection. Pieces made from recycled materials that somehow looked more elegant than anything made from virgin fabrics. Carmen had once told Lucia that fashion was armor, that what you wore could be a statement, a rebellion, a declaration of self. Lucia needed that armor now. Carmen, I need a dress. For what occasion? A wedding. My ex's wedding. The one he invited me to so he could humiliate me in front of his new rich bride. Carmen's laugh was wicked. Oh, honey. I've been waiting for someone to give me this assignment. Tell me everything. Lucia described what she wanted. Something that honored who she was. Something that would stand out in a sea of designer pastels. Something that was unmistakably art. Unmistakably her. I'm thinking royal blue, like the sky before a storm. Something that moves. That demands attention without trying. Hand-painted details. Every inch intentional. Carmen was already sketching. Lucia could hear the scratch of pencil on paper. Silk. Sustainable silk. A silhouette that's elegant but powerful. High slit. Not because we're trying to seduce anyone, but because we're not afraid to take up space. Hand-painted abstract patterns that reference your art. This isn't just a dress. This is a weapon. Exactly. When's the wedding? June 15th. That gives me 3 weeks. I'll have it ready. And Lucia? You're going to walk in there like a queen. Good. That's exactly the energy I'm channeling. Over the next 3 weeks, Lucia worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life. She met with Isabel and Marcus almost daily. Gave them everything she remembered. Names of companies Dominic had acquired. Dates of conversations about pushing out competitors. Details about how Castellano Enterprises said one thing publicly while doing another privately. Marcus did the investigative heavy lifting. He tracked down former business partners. People who'd trusted Dominic's pitch about helping small businesses protect their data, only to find themselves strong-armed into selling their companies for far less than they were worth. He found the paper trails. The financial documents. The emails that proved what Lucia suspected. Dominic Castellano had built his empire exactly like the corporations he claimed to be different from. Through ruthless acquisition, strategic elimination of competition, empty promises and careful manipulation. One afternoon, Marcus came to Lucia's studio with a thick folder. You need to see this. He spread documents across her work table. Emails, financial statements, legal agreements. The evidence was damning. This company here, Marcus pointed to one file. DataShield. Small cybersecurity firm run by a husband and wife team. Immigrants from Nigeria. Dominic approached them 2 years ago. Told them he wanted to partner. Help them scale. Protect them from being crushed by bigger competitors. Lucia scanned the documents, her stomach tightening. Let me guess. He bought them out and gutted the company. Worse. He convinced them to sign an exclusivity agreement while they negotiated. Locked them out of other potential partnerships, then lowballed them on acquisition price. They had to sell because he'd effectively blocked them from other options. He kept the technology. Laid off the entire staff, including the founders. Lucia felt sick. This was the man she'd loved. The man who talked about giving forward, about changing systems. And he'd become the system. Become exactly what he claimed to oppose. How many companies? Marcus flipped through the folder. That we can prove? 14. All small businesses. All told the same story about partnership and protection. All acquired and dismantled. Conservative estimate, about 200 people lost their jobs. Multiple families lost their businesses. And he did this while publicly claiming Castellano Enterprises was helping small businesses, while being praised for it. He's given speeches at conferences, been featured in Forbes as an entrepreneur who remembers his roots. It's all PR, all image. Lucia looked at her paintings on the studio walls, at the piece she'd titled The Emperor's New Clothes. She'd created it about vanity and false image. She hadn't realized how literal it would become. We have enough? Marcus nodded. More than enough. But Lucia, you need to be sure about this. Once this goes public, there's no taking it back. His lawyers will destroy you if they can. They'll dig into your life, your past. They'll try to make this about a bitter ex seeking revenge. Let them dig. I'm not hiding anything. My life is exactly what it appears to be. An artist who works hard and tells the truth. Can he say the same? No. He can't. Meanwhile, Isabel was crafting the documentary. She interviewed the business owners Dominic had betrayed. She filmed Lucia talking about her experience, about how Dominic had tried to reshape her into something more palatable, about the broader pattern of people erasing their authentic selves in pursuit of acceptance from systems that would never truly value them. But the documentary wasn't just about Dominic. It was about something bigger, about the American mythology of the self-made success story, about how we celebrate people for making it while ignoring what they become in the process, about the difference between polish and substance, appearance and authenticity. Isabel wove Lucia's art throughout the film, each piece serving as a visual metaphor for different segments. Hunger for the corporate greed, the emperor's new clothes for false image, unbroken for transformation and resilience. The documentary had Lucia's voice narrating throughout. Not angry, not bitter, just honest, telling her story while connecting it to larger truths about class, ambition, and the soul-destroying cost of chasing acceptance from people who would never truly see you. If you've ever felt like you had to hide who you really are to be accepted, drop a comment below. Because what happens next is going to show you why authenticity always wins in the end. 2 weeks before the wedding, Carmen called Lucia to her studio for the final fitting. The dress took Lucia's breath away. Royal blue silk that seemed to shift shades as it moved. Hand-painted details in gold and crimson that echoed the color palette of Lucia's paintings. The silhouette was elegant but powerful. A high neckline. A dramatic slit that revealed her leg when she walked. Cap sleeves that showed her toned arms. This isn't a dress. Lucia turned in front of the mirror, watching how the fabric moved. This is art. This is armor. This is perfect. Carmen stood back, arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face. You're going to walk into that wedding and every eye will be on you. Not because you're trying to upstage the bride, but because you can't hide this kind of authenticity, this kind of power. Lucia touched the hand-painted details. Each brushstroke intentional, each color choice deliberate. The dress was covered in abstract patterns that referenced her art, her story, her truth. Thank you for seeing what I needed. Thank you for trusting me to create it. Now about accessories. They chose jewelry from local artists. A necklace made from recycled metals by a sculptor in Red Hook. Earrings designed by a jeweler in the Bronx who worked with ethically sourced stones. Every piece had a story. Every piece was a statement of values. And Lucia's hair. She'd been growing out the blue streaks she'd added a year ago. A small rebellion. A visible marker that she'd stopped trying to be palatable. Carmen's stylist figured out how to style it elegantly, swept up in a way that made the blue look intentional, sophisticated, impossible to ignore. 1 week before the wedding, the documentary was finished. Isabel showed Lucia the final cut in her editing studio. They watched it together in silence. 58 minutes of truth, of evidence, of Lucia's transformation intercut with Dominic's corruption. The ending was perfect. It closed on Lucia in her studio, surrounded by her art, talking about the lesson she'd learned. I used to think success meant acceptance, getting into the right rooms, impressing the right people. But real success is being so completely yourself that you don't need anyone's permission to exist. Real success is looking in the mirror and recognizing who you see. Everything else is just expensive emptiness. The screen faded to black. Credits rolled. Then a final message appeared. This film is dedicated to everyone who's ever been made to feel less than for refusing to compromise their truth. You are not less than. You are exactly enough. Lucia had tears in her eyes. It's perfect. It's everything. Isabel nodded. The streaming platforms are ready. We go live June 15th at noon. This thing is going to explode. Marcus's article was also ready. Scheduled to publish on the Manhattan Chronicle's website at noon on June 15th. The headline read, Castellano Enterprises and the Price of Ambition. How one tech millionaire built an empire by destroying the businesses he promised to protect. Everything was in place. The truth was locked and loaded. All that remained was the wedding itself. The morning of June 15th dawned with absurd perfection. Clear blue sky. Gentle breeze. The kind of weather that wedding planners dream about and brides take as a sign from the universe. Lucia woke up at 6, made coffee, sat in her studio apartment surrounded by her art. She felt calm, centered. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about refusing to be erased from her own story, about standing up and saying this is who I am and I will not apologize for it. Raphael arrived at 8 with bagels and encouragement. You ready for this? He set the food on her tiny kitchen counter and studied her face. I'm ready. Nervous, but ready. You should be nervous. You're about to detonate a bomb in the middle of Manhattan high society. But you should also be proud. What you're doing, it's brave. It's necessary. Lucia smiled at her best friend. Raphael had been there through all of it. The crying. The rebuilding. The slow transformation from broken to whole. He'd never judged. Never pushed. Just held space for her to become herself. Come on. Let's get you dressed. You have a wedding to stop. Wait, I thought I was just attending. Raphael grinned. Honey, when you walk in wearing that dress with that documentary about to drop, you're not attending anything. You're making a statement. You're stopping a wedding. Own it. The dress fit like it had been painted on her body. Carmen had tailored it perfectly. Lucia stood in front of her full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked completely, utterly herself. No polish, no pretense. Just Lucia Romano, artist, truth teller, warrior. The blue streaks in her hair, styled elegantly, caught the light. The hand-painted details on the dress moved as she breathed. The jewelry from local artists glinted. She looked like art, like power, like someone who knew exactly who she was and made no apologies. Raphael stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. He's going to regret ever letting you go. No. He's going to regret thinking I needed him in the first place. They took Raphael's car. An old Honda that had seen better days but still ran. The drive from Brooklyn to the Hamptons took 90 minutes. They talked about everything except the wedding. Art, Raphael's new sculpture series, the bakery that had opened down the street. Normal things, grounding things. As they crossed into Southampton, the landscape changed. Estates hidden behind hedges. Private beaches. Old money that didn't need to announce itself. This was Genevieve's world. The world Dominic had married into, literally. The Ashford Kent estate appeared at the end of a long private drive. It was absurd. A sprawling stone mansion that looked like it had been transported from an English countryside. Manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's salaries. White tents set up on the lawn overlooking the ocean. Flowers everywhere. White roses. Thousands of them. Lucia checked her watch. 11:45. 15 minutes until the ceremony. 15 minutes until the documentary went live. 15 minutes until everything changed. You sure about this? Raphael turned off the engine and looked at her. More sure than I've been about anything in years. They walked up to the estate entrance. A young woman with a clipboard checked Lucia's name against the guest list. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Lucia's dress. The contrast with the other arriving guests in their pastel Chanel and understated Dior was stark. But Lucia was on the list. Right there. Lucia Romano. +1. The woman directed them toward the ceremony site. A clifftop overlooking the ocean. White chairs arranged in perfect rows. An altar decorated with more roses and billowing silk. A string quartet playing Vivaldi. Everything perfect. Everything polished. Everything fake. Lucia chose a seat 7 rows back. Close enough to see. Far enough to observe without being immediately noticed. She sat down, smoothing her dress, aware of the eyes turning her way. The whispers starting. Raphael leaned close. They're staring. Let them. More guests arrived. Lucia recognized some from her time with Dominic. Society people. Old money. Tech executives. Politicians. Everyone who was anyone in Manhattan's elite circles. They air-kissed and made small talk and found their seats with practiced ease. Eleanor Castellano, Dominic's mother, arrived in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than a car. She was elegant. Poised. Everything a mother of the groom should be. Her eyes swept the assembled guests and landed on Lucia. For a moment, their gazes locked. Eleanor's eyes widened. Narrowed. She recognized Lucia obviously. The inappropriate girlfriend her son had finally outgrown. The girl who didn't belong. Lucia smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing smile. A smile that said, everything is about to change. Eleanor recovered quickly. Her expression smoothed into polite coolness. She made her way down the aisle to the front row, stopping briefly to whisper to someone. That someone glanced back at Lucia. And so it began. The whispers. The awareness spreading through the crowd. Theodore Castellano arrived next. Dominic's father. Looking distinguished in his tuxedo. He'd always been kinder than Eleanor. Less overtly judgmental. But complicit in his silence. He saw Lucia, and his step faltered slightly. He nodded. A small acknowledgement. Then took his seat beside his wife. 11:55. 5 minutes until noon. 5 minutes until the ceremony started. 5 minutes until the documentary went live. Lucia pulled out her phone. Checked her messages. Isabel had sent a thumbs up emoji. Marcus had sent a simple text. It's live at noon. No turning back. Lucia typed back. No turning back. No regrets. The wedding party began to assemble. Groomsmen in identical tuxedos. Bridesmaids in blush pink dresses that probably came from the same designer. Everything coordinated. Everything controlled. Everything perfect. And then Dominic appeared, walking from the mansion with his best man. He looked good. She had to admit that. The tuxedo fit him perfectly. His hair was styled, his smile confident. He looked like success. Like achievement. Like everything society told you to aspire to. He took his place at the altar. Scanned the crowd with that easy confidence that came from knowing this was his moment. His triumph. His ascension into the world he'd fought so hard to join. His eyes found Lucia. And froze. She watched the emotions flash across his face. Shock. He clearly hadn't expected her to actually come. Then something else. Satisfaction. Smugness. He thought she'd come to watch him win. To see what she'd lost. To witness his happiness with someone more appropriate. Lucia held his gaze steadily. Let him think that. Let him believe he'd won. For 4 more minutes. The officiant took his place. An older man in formal robes. Probably someone important. Someone with the right credentials to marry the right people. The string quartet shifted to a new piece. Wagner. Bridal chorus. Here comes the bride. Everyone stood, turned to watch the bride's entrance. And Genevieve Ashford Kent appeared at the end of the aisle. She was beautiful. Objectively, undeniably beautiful. Her dress was a masterpiece of understated elegance. lace and silk. Probably a designer Lucia had never heard of because it was so exclusive it didn't need name recognition. Her veil was cathedral length. Her bouquet white roses. Everything traditional. Everything perfect. She walked down the aisle with her father. Smiled at guests. Glowed with bridal happiness. When she reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and handed her to Dominic. They turned to face the officiant together. Everyone sat. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke about love, about partnership, about two families joining, about the sanctity of marriage. Standard wedding ceremony language. Beautiful, meaningless. Words said at 1,000 weddings exactly like this one. Lucia checked her watch. 11:59. 1 minute. Dominic and Genevieve held hands, gazed at each other with practiced affection. The officiant continued speaking. Behind Lucia, someone's phone buzzed. Then another, then several at once. Noon. The officiant began the traditional question. If anyone has reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. He said it with the confidence of someone who knew no one would speak. Who expected silence. Who saw this as a formality. The sound system crackled to life. Lucia's pre-recorded voice cut through the clifftop air, clear and strong and impossible to ignore. I do. Chaos erupted instantly. Gasps. Confused murmurs. Heads whipping around trying to locate the source. Dominic's head snapped toward Lucia, his face draining of color. Genevieve turned, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Eleanor Castellano stood from her seat, her hand pressed to her chest. Theodore grabbed her arm, pulling her back down. The officiant looked around in confusion, unsure whether to continue. Lucia remained perfectly still. Perfectly calm. Her hands folded in her lap. Her expression serene. She met Dominic's eyes across the rows of guests and smiled. The voice, her voice, continued from the speakers. Not because of love lost, Dominic, but because of truths untold. On the massive screens flanking the altar, the ones meant to display the ceremony for guests in the back, a new image appeared. The title card for Isabel's documentary. The Price of Polish. How Tech Millionaires Erase Their Roots and Their Ethics. A subtitle appeared beneath it. A film by Isabel Chen, featuring Lucia Romano. Dominic found his voice. Turn it off. Someone turn it off. But no one moved. Everyone was frozen, staring at the screens, at Lucia, at their phones which were now lighting up with notifications as the documentary went viral in real time. The documentary began to play. The opening shot was Lucia in her studio, surrounded by her art. Her voice calm, measured, not angry, just honest. 3 years ago, I fell in love with a man who told me he wanted to change the world, who said he remembered where he came from, who promised that his success would be different, that he'd use his power to give forward, not just give back. I believed him. And he almost destroyed me in the process. The documentary cut to interviews with former business partners, the Nigerian couple who'd lost Data Shield, a Latino entrepreneur who'd been promised partnership and got acquisition instead, a woman who'd built a cybersecurity startup from nothing and watched Dominic dismantle it. Each person told the same story. Dominic Castellano approaching with promises, offering protection and partnership, locking them into exclusivity agreements, then lowballing acquisitions or forcing sales through strategic manipulation, keeping the technology, laying off the staff, absorbing their businesses into Castellano Enterprises, while publicly claiming to help small businesses thrive. The documentary showed emails, financial documents, legal agreements, all the evidence Marcus had gathered, all the proof of systematic deception. If you think this story is powerful, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happens next is going to show you why the truth always comes out. Lucia watched the guests, watched them pull out their phones, watched the realizations spread like wildfire, watched Dominic's carefully constructed image crumble in real time. Genevieve stood at the altar, her veil trembling. She turned to Dominic with an expression Lucia recognized. The look of someone realizing they'd been lied to. That everything they believed was built on sand. What is this? Dominic. What is she talking about? Dominic reached for her. It's lies. She's a bitter ex. This is revenge. But Genevieve stepped back, pulled out her own phone, started scrolling, reading. Her face went pale. You told me these accusations were investigated. You said they were false. You said you built your company ethically. I did. I have. This is out of context. Twisted. From the front row, Theodore Castellano stood. His face was red. His hand clutched at his chest. Eleanor grabbed him, calling for help. But it wasn't a heart attack. It was rage. It was shame. It was the realization that his son's empire was built on exactly the kind of ruthless capitalism they always claimed to be above. Someone finally found the AV controls and cut the documentary feed. But it was too late. The damage was done. Every phone in the crowd was lit up. People were reading Marcus's article, watching the documentary on their devices, sharing it, commenting. The story was everywhere. In the sudden silence, Lucia stood. Every eye turned to her. She smoothed her royal blue dress with deliberate calm, took a breath, and spoke. Her voice carried naturally. No microphone needed. Just truth. You invited me here to humiliate me. She addressed Dominic directly. To show me what I'd lost. To prove I'd never belonged in your world. To remind me that someone like me could never be enough for someone like you. She paused, smiled. A genuine smile. Thank you. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thank you for the reminder that I never wanted to belong to a world that requires erasing who I am. Thank you for showing me that polish and substance are not the same thing. Thank you for breaking my heart 3 years ago, because it forced me to rebuild myself. And the woman I became is worth more than anything you could have given me. She turned to address the assembled guests. Manhattan's elite. The power players. The old money and the new. The people who'd spent their lives in rooms exactly like this one. I hope you all enjoy the documentary. It's not just about Dominic. It's about all of us. About what we're willing to sacrifice for acceptance. About the difference between who we are and who we pretend to be. It's dedicated to everyone who's ever been made to feel less than for refusing to compromise their truth. She met Dominic's eyes one last time. You wanted to prove I didn't belong. You were right. I don't belong here. Because I refused to pay the price of admission. Genevieve stood at the altar, her perfect composure cracking. Lucia watched something shift in the bride's expression. Not anger at Lucia. Something else. Recognition maybe. Or relief. Genevieve's hands shook as she removed her veil. The delicate lace caught on her updo for a moment before coming free. She handed it to one of her bridesmaids without looking. Then she turned to face Dominic fully. This wedding is over. Her voice trembled but held firm. We're over. Everything you told me about building your company ethically, about being different from the robber barons our families used to be, it was all lies. Genevieve, please, we can talk about this privately. Dominic reached for her hand but she stepped back. No. You don't get to control the narrative anymore. My family's foundation will be cutting all ties with Castellano Enterprises. And I'll be cooperating fully with any investigations that come from this. She gathered her dress in her hands and turned to walk down the aisle. But she stopped when she reached Lucia's row. For a moment, the two women looked at each other. The bride and the ex-girlfriend. The woman who almost made the mistake, and the woman who survived it. I'm sorry. Genevieve's voice was quiet but clear. I thought I knew who he was. I thought, because our families had the same background, because we moved in the same circles, that meant he had the same values. Thank you. For the truth. Even though it hurts. Lucia felt unexpected kinship with this woman she'd been prepared to see as an enemy. Truth usually does hurt. But it's necessary. And you're stronger than you know. Trust me on that. Genevieve nodded. Tears streaked her makeup but she held her head high as she walked back down the aisle. Her father met her halfway, confused and concerned. She took his arm and kept walking. Away from the altar. Away from Dominic. Away from a marriage that would have been built on lies. The guests sat in stunned silence. Some were still scrolling through their phones. Others were whispering urgently to their neighbors. A few were already standing, making their way to the exits, wanting to distance themselves from the scandal before it touched them. Eleanor Castellano found her voice, shrill with rage. You planned this. You vindictive, spiteful little girl. You worked with that bride to destroy my family. Lucia turned to face Dominic's mother with calm certainty. No, Mrs. Castellano. Your son destroyed your family himself. I just refused to let him destroy me in the process. There's a difference. But you and Genevieve, you must have coordinated this. We've never met until today. Sometimes the universe just has a sense of justice. And sometimes women recognize the truth when they see it, even when it's painful. Dominic stood abandoned at the altar. His perfect wedding in ruins. His reputation crumbling. His carefully constructed image exposed as exactly that. Construction. Performance. Lies. He tried one last time. Lucia, please. You're making a mistake. These accusations, they're out of context. I can explain everything. She looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing. Not love. Not hate. Not even satisfaction. Just a distant kind of pity for someone who'd traded everything real for something shiny and hollow. I'm sure you'll try to explain. That's what people like you do. Spin stories. Control narratives. But here's the thing, Dominic. The truth doesn't need explanation. It just is. She turned to Raphael, who'd been sitting beside her through all of it, a proud smile on his face. I think we're done here. They walked down the aisle together. Past the shocked guests. Past the elaborate flowers and the silk decorations and all the expensive trappings of a world that valued appearance over authenticity. As they reached the back of the ceremony space, Lucia heard her phone buzzing frantically in her clutch. Messages flooding in. But she didn't check them yet. The June afternoon was perfect. Warm sun. Ocean breeze. The kind of day that was wasted on people who couldn't appreciate it. Lucia and Raphael walked back to his car in silence. It wasn't until they were inside, doors closed, that Raphael spoke. That was the most badass thing I've ever witnessed. Lucia laughed. It came out shaky. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving her feeling almost lightheaded. I can't believe that just happened. You were perfect. Calm. Powerful. You didn't gloat. You didn't rage. You just told the truth and walked away. Lucia pulled out her phone. The notifications were overwhelming. Hundreds of texts, emails, social media mentions. The documentary had already been viewed over 200,000 times, and it had only been live for 30 minutes. Marcus's article was trending. Hashtag the price of polish was the #1 topic on Twitter. Her hands shook slightly as she scrolled through messages. From Isabel. From Marcus. From other artists. From people she'd never met, thanking her for her courage. From journalists requesting interviews. From galleries wanting to feature her work. And one message from an unknown number. This is Genevieve. I got your number from Marcus Webb. I know this is strange, but I'd like to talk when things calm down. What you did today saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Thank you. Lucia showed the message to Raphael. Are you going to respond? Eventually. But right now, I just want to go home. They drove back to Brooklyn in comfortable silence. As they crossed back into the city, leaving the Hamptons and its gilded estates behind, Lucia felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Closure. The sense of a chapter ending not with bitterness but with resolution. The weeks that followed the wedding that wasn't became a blur of activity. The documentary went viral. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 5 million times. News outlets picked up the story. Think pieces flooded the internet. Hashtags trended. Been a price of polish. Hashtag authenticity wins. And Castellano exposed. Dominic's business empire began to crumble. Federal investigations were launched into Castellano Enterprises' acquisition practices. The SEC opened an inquiry into financial irregularities. State attorneys general from 3 different states started looking into consumer protection violations. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. Investors pulled funding. Corporate partners severed ties. The carefully built machine that was Castellano Enterprises started falling apart under the weight of revealed truth. Dominic himself disappeared from public view. His social media went dark. His office released a statement about taking time to address false accusations, but no one believed it. The evidence was too strong. The documentation too thorough. But Lucia's story wasn't about Dominic's fall. It was about her rise. Her gallery exhibition, which opened 1 week after the wedding, sold out in the first hour. Every single piece. Museums called. Major galleries reached out. Interview requests came from everywhere. NPR, The New York Times, late-night talk shows. But Lucia was selective about what she accepted. She said yes to interviews that wanted to talk about art and authenticity, about the pressure artists face to commercialize their vision. about staying true to yourself in systems designed to make you conform. She said no to anything that wanted to focus on Dominic or revenge or the spectacle of the wedding. This isn't about him, she told one persistent entertainment reporter. This is about every person who's ever been told they're too much, too loud, too passionate, too real. This is about the art we make when we stop seeking approval and start seeking truth. 3 months after the wedding, Lucia got a call from Dr. Margaret Canterbury, Genevieve's grandmother, civil rights activist, legend. The woman's voice was warm but carried the weight of someone who'd seen and survived real battles. Miss Romano, I wanted to thank you properly. What you did, it wasn't just about stopping a wedding. It was about speaking truth to power, something I've dedicated my life to. Lucia felt humbled. I just told the truth, Dr. Canterbury. That's all. That's never just anything, dear. Truth is revolutionary. And I'd like to discuss a potential collaboration. My family's foundation is refocusing. We want to support artists from underrepresented communities, not by polishing them up to be palatable, but by giving them resources to amplify their authentic voices. Genevieve suggested you might be willing to help guide that vision. Genevieve and Lucia had met for coffee 2 weeks after the wedding. It had been awkward at first. 2 women connected by the same man's betrayal. But they'd found common ground quickly. Genevieve had spent her life being what her family expected. The perfect daughter, the appropriate partner, the polished product of generations of old money. The wedding debacle had cracked that facade open. Underneath, Genevieve was smart, thoughtful, genuinely committed to using her privilege for good. I'd be honored to help, Lucia told Dr. Canterbury. On one condition. I need complete creative autonomy. And the foundation's support needs to extend beyond me to other artists who are doing the real work. Dr. Canterbury's laugh was delighted. I wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months after the wedding, Lucia stood in her new studio space. She'd purchased a former warehouse in Red Hook with the proceeds from her art sales. It was huge, light-filled, perfect. But she wasn't using it just for herself. Half the space was her private studio. The other half was a free workshop for young artists from working-class backgrounds. Artists who were talented but struggling, who needed space and materials and mentorship, who needed to know that success didn't require erasing who you were. Raphael had moved his sculpture practice into an adjacent unit. Isabel was using part of the space as an editing suite for her next documentary. Carmen had set up a small design studio in the corner. It had become a creative collective, a community, a place where art and authenticity were valued above all else. On this particular afternoon, Lucia was teaching a workshop on finding your artistic voice. 12 students, ranging from 18 to 65. Different backgrounds, different experiences, all searching for how to express their truth. One young woman, Maria, raised her hand hesitantly. What if your truth isn't pretty? What if it's angry, or messy, or not the kind of thing that sells? Lucia smiled. She'd been asked versions of this question 100 times. Then it's even more important to express it, because someone out there needs to see their anger reflected back at them. Someone needs to know they're not alone in the mess. Art that's just pretty decoration, that's fine. But art that tells the truth, even ugly truth, that changes people, that matters. Another student, David, spoke up. But how do you make a living if you're not making what people want to buy? That's the real question, isn't it? Lucia sat on the edge of a work table. And honestly, there's no easy answer. I waited tables for years. Worked multiple jobs. Struggled. But here's what I learned. When you make work that's truly authentic, that comes from your real voice, it finds its audience. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not the audience you expected. But people recognize truth. They're hungry for it. Especially in a world full of polish and performance. She thought about Dominic. About how his carefully polished image had crumbled the moment truth touched it. About how her messy, honest art had found more success than she'd dreamed possible. The trick is figuring out what success means to you. If success is being rich, then yeah, you might need to compromise. But if success is making work that matters, that says something true, that contributes to important conversations, then authenticity is the only path. After the workshop, Lucia returned to her private studio section. She was working on a new piece, a massive canvas that explored joy. Not the polished, Instagram-ready version of happiness, but real joy. Messy, complicated, hard-won. She'd titled it After the Storm. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Lucia Romano? The voice was male. Unfamiliar. Professional. Yes. Who's calling? My name is James Chen. I'm a curator at the Museum of Modern Art. I'm calling about a potential retrospective. Lucia's hand tightened on the phone. I'm sorry, a what? A retrospective. We'd like to do a major exhibition of your work. Your journey from your early pieces to your current work. The transformation, the evolution of your voice. We think it's an important story to tell. Lucia sat down heavily on her work stool. MoMA wants to do a retrospective of my work. Yes. If you're interested, we're looking at next spring. 3-month run. Main gallery space. Full catalog. The works. This was the Museum of Modern Art. The same museum where Dominic had once pulled her aside and told her she was too intense. Where she'd defended art that challenged comfortable narratives and been made to feel inappropriate for caring. I'm very interested. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Wonderful. I'll have my assistant reach out to schedule a meeting. We can discuss details, timeline, which pieces you'd like to include. After they hung up, Lucia sat in her studio for a long time. Just breathing. Just taking it in. A MoMA retrospective. At 33, it was unprecedented for an artist at her career stage. But then again, her story was unprecedented. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago. Heartbroken. Lost. Believing her value came from someone else's approval. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, she wouldn't believe it. The pain. The transformation. The triumph. All of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Isabel. Did you see? Castellano Enterprises filed for bankruptcy. It's over. Lucia read the message and felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just a distant acknowledgement. Dominic's empire was gone. Built on lies, it had collapsed when truth touched it. That was just cause and effect. Natural consequence. She typed back. Saw it. How are you? Working on the next film. About women rebuilding after corporate betrayal. Want to be involved? Always. Lucia set down her phone and returned to her canvas. After the storm. The colors were bold. Yellows and oranges and deep blues. The composition was dynamic. Movement and energy. It was about survival. About coming through darkness and finding not just light but vitality, purpose, self. As the afternoon sun slanted through her studio windows, painting everything gold, Lucia Romano painted with complete focus. Her hands, permanently stained despite her best efforts, moved with confidence. Each brushstroke was intentional. Each color choice deliberate. This was her voice. Unfiltered. Unpolished. Undeniably hers. 2 years later, on a crisp October evening, Lucia stood in the Museum of Modern Art surrounded by her life's work. The retrospective had opened to critical acclaim. Lines around the block. Sold-out tickets. Reviews calling it one of the most important exhibitions of the decade. The main gallery held her journey in chronological order. Early pieces from before Dominic. The work she'd made while they were together, noticeably more restrained. Then the explosion of her post-breakup transformation. Raw. Powerful. Uncompromising. And finally, her recent work. Pieces that explored joy and community and the beauty of authenticity. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a new work she'd created specifically for this show. Titled Becoming, it was a massive mixed media installation. Fragments of her old life, including pieces of the designer dresses Dominic had bought her, woven together with materials from Queens. Salvaged metals. Recycled wood. Bold paints. The piece showed destruction and reconstruction. Breaking and healing. It was her story made physical. Lucia moved through the crowded gallery, listening to conversations, watching people respond to her work. A young woman stood crying in front of hunger. An older couple debated the meaning of the emperor's new clothes. A group of art students sketched details from Unbroken. Genevieve found her near the Becoming installation. In the 2 years since the wedding, they'd developed an unlikely friendship. Genevieve had gone back to school, was getting her PhD in art history, had completely restructured the Canterbury Foundation to genuinely support underrepresented artists. This is incredible. Genevieve gestured to the crowded gallery. You did it. Everything you dreamed of. Lucia smiled. This isn't what I dreamed of. This is better. Because I didn't have to change who I am to get here. Can I ask you something? Genevieve's voice was quiet. I've been wondering. Do you think about him? About Dominic? Sometimes. But not the way you'd think. I don't think about what we had or what I lost. I think about what I gained. He thought he was humiliating me with that wedding invitation, but really, he gave me the push I needed to fully step into myself. Genevieve nodded slowly. I think about him too. About what a life with him would have been. How much of myself I would have had to erase. You saved me from that. We saved each other, Lucia corrected. You had the courage to call off that wedding. To walk away from what was expected. That's not easy. No. But it was necessary. Near the entrance, Lucia spotted Miriam with Raphael and Carmen. Her people. The community that had held her up and celebrated her, and never asked her to be anything other than herself. Dr. Canterbury was there too, leaning on her cane but standing tall. Isabel was filming crowd reactions for a short documentary about the exhibition. And in the corner, standing before her early work, Lucia saw her parents, Vincent and Angela Romano, looking bewildered by the crowd and the attention, but trying their best to understand. Her mother wore her best dress. Her father had on a suit. They'd driven in from Queens, navigating a world they'd never been part of, because their daughter's art was being celebrated. Lucia made her way over to them. Ma. Dad. You came. Angela pulled her into a tight hug. Of course, we came. Our daughter has a show at a museum. A museum, Lucia. Vincent's eyes were suspiciously bright. I don't understand all of it. But I can see it means something. People are moved by it. You did this, baby girl. You made something that matters. That moment, more than any review or sold-out ticket or critical acclaim, felt like success. Her parents might not fully understand her art, but they saw her happiness, her fulfillment. And that was enough. As the evening wound down and the crowds began to thin, Lucia found herself alone in the gallery. The security guard gave her a few extra minutes, understanding the significance. She walked slowly through the exhibition. Her journey made visible. Every pain, every triumph, every moment of doubt and determination. She stopped in front of becoming the centerpiece, the piece that showed her transformation. In its reflection, she saw herself. Not the girl who'd needed Dominic Castellano's approval, not the woman who'd changed herself to fit into his world, but Lucia Romano, artist, truth-teller, someone who'd learned that the only approval that mattered was her own. 3 years ago she'd received an invitation designed to humiliate her, to show her what she'd lost, to prove she'd never been good enough. And in a way, Dominic had been right. She wasn't good enough for his world. Because his world required compromise she wasn't willing to make, required polish that would have hidden her truth, required silence when she needed to speak. But her world, the one she'd built from honesty and authenticity and refusal to be diminished, was bigger and more beautiful than anything he could have given her. Her world had community, had purpose, had art that mattered, had mornings waking up and recognizing herself in the mirror. So what's the real lesson here? What's the truth buried in this story of weddings and documentaries and empires built on lies? It's this: your worth is not determined by who accepts you. Your value doesn't come from fitting into spaces that were never meant to hold you. Success isn't about impressing the right people or gaining access to exclusive rooms. Real success is being so completely yourself that you don't need permission to exist. Sometimes the people who reject you are doing you a favor. Sometimes heartbreak is the universe protecting you from a life that would have required you to betray yourself. Sometimes what looks like loss is actually liberation. And here's the thing about truth: it always finds a way out. You can polish it, hide it, dress it up in expensive clothes, and teach it to smile at the right times. But eventually, truth breaks through. And when it does, everything built on lies crumbles. Lucia had learned that authenticity is more valuable than approval. That the only person you need to impress is yourself. That art, real art, comes from truth even when that truth is uncomfortable. That community built on genuine connection is worth more than networking built on strategic relationships. She'd learned that transformation is possible. That you can rebuild yourself from the ruins of who you thought you were supposed to be. That pain can be fuel if you let it. That the people who truly see you will love you for exactly who you are, not who they want you to become. As Lucia left the museum that night, Walking out into the October air with her parents and her chosen family, she felt complete, whole, herself. The city lights glittered around her. The same city where she'd been heartbroken 3 years ago. But she was different now. Stronger. Clearer. Free. She was invited to a wedding to be humiliated. Instead, she'd shown the world what real power looked like. Not money, not status, not access, but truth. Courage. The willingness to stand up and say, "This is who I am and I will not apologize." And that, Lucia Romano knew as she walked into her future, surrounded by people who loved her for exactly who she was. That was worth more than all the Hampton estates and penthouse views and designer dresses combined. The masterpiece of her life wasn't hanging on any museum wall, though her art would endure there. The real masterpiece was the life itself. Vibrant, authentic, messy in places, imperfect, but completely, defiantly, beautifully hers. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. To live so honestly that when we look in the mirror, we recognize who's looking back. To create something, whether art or life or community, that comes from truth. To refuse to be diminished by people who mistake polish for substance. Lucia Romano had been invited to watch her ex-millionaire boyfriend marry someone more appropriate. She'd accepted that invitation. But not as the girl he remembered. As the woman she'd become. And she'd brought truth with her. And truth, it turns out, is the most powerful weapon of all. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt the pressure to be someone you're not, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from heartbreak, do me a favor. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with your own story of choosing authenticity over approval. Subscribe to Cedar Light Love Stories for more narratives about real people facing real choices and finding their way to truth. Because these stories, they're not just entertainment. They're reminders that you're not alone. That transformation is possible. That your authentic self is more valuable than any polished version someone else wants you to be. Until next time, remember this. The only person you need to impress is the one looking back at you in the mirror. Everything else is just noise.